The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. I vow to always follow the Buddha's teachings. Sometimes this vow is translated as to always study with the Buddhas. There is a place in practicing the Dharma for studying the Dharma. It just takes a different form than we might expect in Zen practice. Now, for me and for many in the Soto Zen world, Great Master Dogen is a sort of guiding figure, a luminary. Reverend Master Jiu commented on many of his texts, and of course we have a really excellent translation of Dogen's work. And for myself, I seem to find his teachings to be very helpful and useful. Not everyone does, but for myself I do. And I will often go to Dogen when I'm trying to articulate something that I've learned or something that I want to communicate. Now, it should be said that, and it can be said that Dogen and any other person, text, whatever, is not some kind of God. There's a kind of nice little story from Reverend Master Jiu's autobiography, The Wild White Goose, where she is all head up about something and she goes to her teacher and is, kind of going on about behavior in the monastery where she lives. And she says, Shakyamuni Buddha would never have allowed this to happen. And Koho Zenji, her teacher, was just smiled and said, I have nothing to do with Shakyamuni Buddha. Similarly, one day I was all enthusiastic about something I'd read in Dogen and went to my Kyojushi at the time, Reverend Master Hario, my precepts teacher, and was all going on about Dogen, and he just kind of looked at me and said, well, I don't really know anything about Dogen. Kind of deflated me. And this goes to a thing that we do with knowledge. We learn something, and then we put that knowledge between ourselves and some aspect of reality. Sometimes I have this image of sitting in front of vast, empty space. So vast and empty that it's kind of frightening. And there's a tendency to want to fill it up or put up a screen between us and it. This is what we do with our knowledge and what we know and think and remember. And the nice thing about Dogen, from my point of view, is he understands this. So he says, When one studies Buddhism, one studies oneself. When one studies oneself, one forgets oneself. When one forgets oneself, one is enlightened by everything. And this very enlightenment breaks the bonds of clinging to both body and mind, not only for oneself, but for all beings as well. When one studies Buddhism, one studies oneself. Sometimes, as maybe I mentioned, I don't know, I vow to always follow the Buddha's teachings is sometimes said to always study with the Buddhas. And this is the kind of study that we do with the Buddhas. And that saying, studying with the Buddhas, is very important. I have a great capacity to fool myself. I have a great capacity to misunderstand, to get it wrong, to misremember. And so I value, for my own sanity and safety and practice, the studying with the Buddhas. In my youth, there was a kind of vein of conversation with my pals about a kind of mockery of religion, like religion is a crutch, and we don't need a crutch. Well, in my increasing age, I think a crutch is pretty great. And I'm grateful for it. So we study, I vow to study with the Buddhas. I vow to follow the Buddha's teaching. And as I started the talks with, the Sangha is a precept that we take. Our good Dharma friends are essential in our practice of the Dharma. One thing for myself as a monk, I have to understand that I am not just, in a sense, practicing the Dharma. I'm also taking up a tradition and a lineage. And I'm making that tradition and lineage available in the world. Whether I happen to be doing that actively as the priest of a temple, or maybe I'm just a monk quietly doing my work in the monastery. Either way, I take up the lineage, and I'm making it available. And so I find that it is my business to understand how we practice in the lineage and to offer that in detail to beings. And it is also my business then to let go of my inclinations in other directions. So what is it to study the self then? Of course, this means to study all the ways in which we get entangled in greed, hate, and delusion. To study how we create a false self, how we create barriers and separations between ourselves and the rest of the world, how we isolate and define ourselves. And it is also how we understand the illusory nature of that self that is created around greed, hate, and delusion. And so part of the studying of the self is to study the greater self, the true self. This is what it means, in a sense, to forget oneself. We steadily go through well, here's a thought. Maybe it's a dangerous thought. I don't know. I'll share it with you. River Master Jiu talks about the experience of awakening. We don't really talk about this very much, and with good reason, kind of sets up people's greed and all that stuff. But anyway, she wrote about it and talked about it, so here I'll go. It helps me to think of it. She talks about the first Kensho, the first awakening experience, as heaven penetrating earth. And that means it's like the Buddha kind of reaching down and giving us a hand to let go of the self. Probably my teachers and the Buddhas and ancestors are cringing at my description of it, but there you go. The Buddha is reaching down from heaven and giving us a hand to let go of the self, and it happens all in a flash, so she says. And then there is the next stage of practice. In this first stage, we just sort of let go of everything all at once. But in the next stage of practice, which is the practice of Samantabhadra, we have to go through and study each aspect of ourself and come to know it and let it go. And this is an ongoing kind of patient effort. I read about that and I thought to myself, well, I don't know that I've ever experienced that first Kensho, but what can I do? What can I do? I can go through and look carefully at everything that arises in my mind. I can study the self in detail and work on letting it go, work on converting it, work on being still within it, accepting the consequences that I experience in body and mind. Step by step, the patient practice of Samantabhadra. I'm going to, for myself, leave the whole business of religious experience in the hands of the Buddha. Whenever I get all fascinated with it, I'm just going to let it go and leave it in the hands of the Buddha. In a way, this is not my business. But my business is to always follow the Buddha's teaching, to always practice with the Buddha. When one studies oneself, one forgets oneself. When one forgets oneself, one is enlightened by everything, and this very enlightenment breaks the bonds of clinging to both body and mind, not only for oneself, but for all beings. It all starts with the studying of the self. Right here, right now. We might feel completely miserable. Okay, I feel completely miserable. How can I turn toward practice in that? How can I sit still? Maybe just look up. Kishtagarbha, the Bodhisattva, says that if you can remember just a single verse of the teaching, single word of the teaching, Kishtigarbha will rescue you from hell. So maybe I end up in hell, and I'll just keep trying my best to remember that one word, to turn toward the Dharma. Look up, let go, be willing. And who knows, in that place maybe we will learn something. And this is to be enlightened by all things. Further, Dogen says, in a different work, there are two ways in which we set body and mind right. One is to hear the teaching from a master, and the other is to do pure zazen yourself. If you hear the teachings, the conscious mind is put to work, whilst zazen embraces both training and enlightenment. In order to understand the truth, you need both. How fortunate are we at this very moment to encounter competent teachers who have a little inkling of how to practice the Dharma. In this very moment, we have some pretty good teachers around. They're not the super great teachers from the past. They're not Reverend Master Jiyu or Dogen or the Buddha. They're just the everyday teachers that we have today who have some insight into practice. This is actually the way it has been ever since the time of the Buddha, ever since the Buddha passed away from the world. Somebody, some ordinary person thinks, wow, there must be something more to life. I'm going to go look for it. I've heard about this Buddha Dharma, maybe I'll go there. And you do, and there's a person who's teaching the truth, who is, to the best of their ability, adhering to the lineage and practice that they have inherited. And you kind of think, gulp, a regular human being. I'll go to them and hear the teaching. Buddhism, from the beginning, has always been an oral tradition. It has always been one human being passing on the teaching to another human being. For the first, several hundred years, there was nothing written down. You couldn't go to the library and check out a book about Buddhism. It just wasn't written down. A teacher remembered what their teacher said, and they passed that on to their students. This takes two forms. One is the memorization of the scriptures and the teaching, the actual memorization of the words, not what I do, which is kind of remembering vaguely what somebody said and then trying my best to be true to that. But it is the memorization of the scriptures and the ability to recite them back. And the second part of that, on that level, is the willingness for the student to take correction from the teacher. Yeah, that's close, but really what I said was this. So that's one aspect of the oral tradition. But there's another aspect of it, which is the student taking up the teaching and putting it into practice. And listening and remembering and hearing what the practice is and putting that into action. And that also has that second aspect, which is being willing for the teacher to say, yeah, that's pretty close, but that's not quite it. The Dharma has always been passed on in that way. And it is essential for the Dharma to be passed on in that way. There is great merit in reading the Dharma. I do not wish to undermine that. And there is this other part of it, which is being willing to have the Dharma applied to us. Getting to know a teacher, having them say, yeah, you might want to do it this way instead of that way. Specifically for us. This is what it means, in a sense, to hear the teachings from a master. How does it apply to us specifically? We might think, oh, my master doesn't understand me. They don't understand or see this part of myself. Well, maybe they don't. Maybe they don't understand you in that way that you want them to. But if they're a real teacher, then they will understand how a multitude of people can apply the Dharma to us. They will understand how we can apply the Dharma to ourselves. We are, sometimes a teacher is described as being a mountain. And in the Chinese Zen text, you might hear a teacher saying, I come from Mount Tendo, or I was climbing Mount Tendo. I was climbing the mountain of that teacher, and it means I was doing my best to come to understand what my teacher was pointing out. I was doing my best to climb that mountain. In a way, I have spent my life climbing the mountain of Jiu Kennet and my other teachers. We have to bring ourselves up to the level of the Dharma. And we can do that. We can do that. By putting the teaching into practice, by doing Zazen, by being willing to put up with the ups and downs and difficulties of practice. Practice, you may have some inclination of this. I hope it's not too surprising. Practice is very difficult. We need both. Neither a clear head nor a good knowledge of learning are of great importance, any more than our mind, will, consciousness, thought, understanding, or perception. All of them are useless. To enter the stream of Buddhism, one must just simply harmonize mind and body. Shakyamuni Buddha said that one must turn the stream of compassion within and give up both knowledge and its recognition. Herein lies the full meaning of the above, for in this neither movement nor stillness are in ascendancy, and this is true harmony. We don't have to be a super smart person. We don't have to be even able to, you know, say anything, really. Just give up knowledge and its recognition. Turn the stream of compassion within. Turn the stream of meditation within. Work on keeping the vows. We just steadily keep going forward, Samantabhadra's elephant, one step at a time, learning what we can from our own experience and practice within the context of training within the Sangha. Sometimes we might think, I have to trust my own training, trust my own practice. And it seems to be in conflict with the Sangha. There's a difficult place to be. We can just remember that our training and practice brought us here. Our own heart brought us to taking the precepts and keeping them, and to take refuge in the Sangha. There's a story of Reverend Master Daisui and one of Reverend Master Jiu's chief disciples, since passed away, and Reverend Master Jiu. He kept having this feeling, I'd like to go off and make a hermitage, build a hermitage. And he would bring it up to her and she'd say, yeah, no. As he described it, he kept thinking, wow, this is something I should do. I believe when he was describing this to us that he said, I think what she was picking up on is my impulse to try to get away from people. This impulse to want to go off and be by myself where it would be easier to practice. And so he would ask her, and she would say no. And he would say, okay, I'll set that aside for a while. I'll set that aside. I think that's what he said. I'll set that aside. Not even for a while. I'll just set that aside. He set it aside, and then it would come back. And he would sit with it, train with it, bring it to her again. Yeah, no. Yeah, don't do that. This went on 3 or 4 times over the years. And finally, he said something sort of maybe unrelated to that thing had changed in his practice. And he was looking at it again, and it kept coming up, and he said, this keeps coming up. I think it would be a good idea if I built this hermitage. And she apparently heard him and said, oh, that sounds like a good idea. Why don't you look into it? And so he did. Our teachers are not trying to oppress us or keep us down or anything like that. More to say, actually, interestingly, he said, at a certain point when he found a property that he thought was good, he went to her and she said, yeah, that sounds good. Go for the gold. This is what our teachers want for us. They're not trying to oppress us or keep us from doing fun things or anything like that. They want us to have the gold. They want us to have the ultimate. Let us all be willing to stick to it until we find the gold. Homage to all the Buddhas in all worlds. Homage to all the Bodhisattvas in all worlds. Homage to the scripture of great wisdom.